last day and a half, there's been a lot of conversations around what philanthropy does in Africa and how philanthropy needs to do more. Today in particular, we've heard a lot about the importance of sustainable development, sustainable philanthropy, sustainable support. And we all know that at the heart of sustainability and scale sits government. So whatever we might think of our governments, they are at the heart of the ambition that we want to realize. So earlier on, a young lady said, what will success look like? And I think somebody on the panel said success looks like when governments are providing health and education at scale. It's true. So I have with me 4 excellent individuals who have taken that call to action and recognized the important role that governments play. And they're going to share with us their experience of supporting governments to really take to scale the work that they are doing. And I'd like to start with Ofowe. Ofowe, I know your organization has actually gone into the heart of government. It is focused on systemic reform within the civil service. And it would be great if you could share with us the work that you are doing and some of the successes that you have found from your work.
Thank you very much, Mavis, and it's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Ofowe Agimokode, and I am co-founder and executive vice chair of the Agimokode Foundation. We're basically a public sector focused organization, and that means that we support the reform efforts of the public sector. Our theory of change really is that the more effective a public sector is, the better able the government is to provide public goods and services for its citizens. So what we do is we support by providing capacity building for the public servants. We support reform initiatives. In fact, our organization helped to develop the very first federal strategy implementation plan that covers the entirety of public sector reforms in Nigeria. We provide technical assistance, we provide funding. What we do is we go down in the trenches and work side by side with the public sector. We see ourselves as partners and collaborators, bringing private sector funding, private sector know-how to increase the ability of the government to actually transform. Now, people always say, why do you focus on the public sector and not on health and education and so forth? And I say, there's a lot of funding being channeled into those particular sectors anyway. Yesterday, the question was asked, why is it that everything that we have done so far has not been successful? I look at all of this funding as money being poured, like water being poured into a leaky basket. Because unless you shore up the foundation, unless you build the systems, anything, any sort of intervention will not be successful, will not be sustainable. So what we do as an organization, as I said, is we help to define the reforms, and then we actually build the capacity of the public servants themselves to implement those reforms. Key amongst our focus areas is digitalization. Because if you take away the manual processes, you increase efficiency, you remove the opportunity for a lot of the interference, a lot of the corruption, a lot of the ways in which money sort of, sneaks out the door. So we have focused on digitalization. That was our very first big project with the Nigerian Civil Service. And we started a pilot with the Office of the Head of the Civil Service itself, which is the public administrator of the entire public service. And it took us longer than we expected, but we have been successful in digitalizing the Office of the Head of the Civil Service. We've seen an increase in 75% increase in efficiency, reduction in work time. 61% of civil servants in that particular office are now more digitally able. We entered into a partnership with Microsoft Philanthropies to actually help to build the capacity of those civil servants. Now, the important thing that we did is we didn't go in and do the work for them. For sustainability, it's important that the public servants have ownership of anything that they're doing. We hear all the time about, someone was talking about fly in, fly out consultants who come in, do a piece of work, write a beautiful policy, and leave, and it just sits in the drawer. It's important that the public servants themselves have ownership of it, and they have the capacity to actually implement. So a big part of our work is building that capacity. We have a partnership with the University of Oxford, and the faculty from the Blavatnik School of Government actually comes to Nigeria every year and trains a large number of public servants who then go and implement projects in their ministries, departments, and agencies. And that alumni group that we have is over 200 strong. And the impact that they're having in their various organizations is amazing because they're trained, they're empowered, they have support from the foundation to help to implement their projects. So I could go on and on, I don't want to take too much time. But the biggest takeaway that I would like to give to anyone who is interested in this work is that you have to understand that public servants themselves need to drive the reforms. As external parties, you can support, but if they don't have ownership, nothing will change.
Thank you so much. So 3 key points: ownership, digital public infrastructure, capacity building. And that's where we begin to sow the seeds for systemic change and scale up. Thank you. Bisi, now you are a philanthropist who decided to go into the belly of government. I would love to hear from you your experience of what works well when philanthropists try to engage with government systems. So BC has spoken very much from a philanthropist supporting. You actually went into the system. I would love to hear your views.
Thank you very much. We are still morning. Good morning, everyone. It's really, it is still morning, It's really great to be here at this APF conference. And I'm really delighted that we are having these really important conversations about the power that we have as African philanthropists or Africans doing philanthropy. I would not say I was directly involved in government. I was minding my own business in my comfort zone as a gender specialist, as a feminist activist, as a feminist philanthropist, doing my own thing with the African Women's Development Fund in Accra, when my husband, who is a scholar and civil society person, decided to go into politics in Nigeria. So he became the governor of Ekiti State in Nigeria, one of the 36 states in Nigeria. And it coincided with the time that I decided that I'd spent enough time at AWDF, it had been 10 years. So I relocated from Accra to Nigeria to support his work as the governor of the state. Now, one of the first things that bothered me was, what difference can I truly make in this strange position I find myself in? Because you know the conversation that feminists usually have around mainstream power and women who have access to those spaces and what they do with it. And I felt, with all the work that I've done around the world and around the African continent, I need to make sure that charity begins at home. And so I started to focus on policy advocacy as a tool for ensuring that the status of women in the state was raised. And that journey led me to do things within the state and beyond. I want to cite 2 examples in which engagements with philanthropists supported the work of the government in very meaningful ways. Ekiti State is roughly 4 hours from Lagos by road. It's a 45-hour flight from Abuja, and 30-minute flight from Lagos. If you can find a flight from Lagos to Akure, then you have another hour and a half to drive to Ekiti. So Ekiti is not exactly Lagos. We are not Abuja. It's not a place where a lot of donors want to go and do work with, although we would really like you to come to Ekiti State. So it's not on the map of many donors. But we do have very prominent Ekiti persons, sons and daughters, in the internal diaspora in the country and outside of the country. So during COVID in 2020, where after the federal government had set up different task forces around support for COVID, and then we had the Corporate Alliance for COVID in Nigeria, against COVID in Nigeria, CACOVID. At state level, a number of the governors set up similar fundraising efforts. And so in Ekiti State, my husband set up a task force to help the state with thinking through how we could respond to issues around COVID. And what was interesting is these 40 prominent persons decided that they were not only going to deal with COVID-related issues as such, which would be counted as short-term, but they wanted to think long-term about how they could continue to support certain investments in the state, particularly around healthcare and other social investment issues. Now, the COVID crisis, as many of us know, and we heard it yesterday on the gender panel, also coincided with a sexual and gender-based violence pandemic. Those of us working in the feminist movement had known this for a long time. But during COVID, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and we felt, okay, why not? If you're all hearing about this for the first time, let's roll with that. And so around the time that this committee was doing their work on mobilizing resources for long-term investments around COVID, I used that as an opportunity to draw attention to what could be done around sexual and gender-based violence. And so I got them to invest in a sexual assault referral center. And that work was taken from not just Ekiti State, but it was taken across the country, because around the time, my husband was chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum. And so he was working with his other colleagues on a whole range of issues. And so I was responsible for mobilizing the spouses of the governors around the country. So I encouraged them to also set up work around sexual and gender-based violence, and make sure that the laws were passed, and ensure that they had certain resources like SAC centers and so on. And because of all the work we did and the support we got from not only the private individuals who were supporting us, but also foundations like the Ford Foundation and MacArthur Foundation, we were able to move the adoption of the national GBV laws from 13 states who had adopted the laws as of June 2020 to 35 states as we speak now. And that was as a result of the efforts we all put into making sure it happened at state level with support from different private donors who supported our work. So what I took away from that is, just as the previous panel told us, all hands have to be on deck. It's extremely important for us to figure out ways in which you can support work that can be taken to scale. Not everybody can work with government. Not everyone wants to work with government, but the governments know, particularly subnationals and governments at other levels, provinces and so on, they know that they can't do all the things they need to do if they don't work with philanthropists.
Thank you very much, Bessie. And I think the point you made around you were in a very strategic position, and you used that strategic position to bring support to not just the state government, but also to mobilize your peers around other state governments to mobilize support. And so earlier we were talking about what can remittances do. This is an excellent example of how you can combine remittances and philanthropy to really support system support at the government level. Now, Dylan, you run an organization that benefits from philanthropic support to be able to support governments in the health system space. We'd love to hear your views on what has worked well and what has worked less well, both as an intermediary between the government and the philanthropists who are financing you.
Yeah, thanks. So we start from the problem that there's 600 million Africans that don't have access to quality health services. And most people who access a health system at all do it through the public system. But government is the way that we roll out healthcare at scale. And so we work with public sector health teams to make them more effective and efficient at their jobs. By providing tools and techniques, our focus is less on the technical side of health, more on leadership and management and some of the systems and tools that teams need to be really effective at what they do. We've done that in 13 countries across the continent now. We had 27 partnerships, I think it is, at various levels of government. We do it through a combination of embedded support, so more structured training and capacity building, and then a lot of peer exchange. We like to bring our teams together to learn from one another. But to the question of what works and what doesn't, maybe just to start with a story from my own experience. Because I started with AMP Health as embedded support in the community health team in Zambia, where I spent 2 years. And I arrived there in Deke House, which is the Ministry of Health building in Lusaka, and it's sort of immediately clear that this team really needs a better project management system in place, right? Okay, well, I'm just going to get this whole team on a platform. Asana is free. We'll get them all up and running on Asana by the end of the week. Community health is fixed in Zambia. You're welcome, and I'll move on to the next thing. And that obviously immediately blew up in my face for a whole lot of reasons, right? Because I hadn't fully understood the issue. I hadn't understood why people worked the way that they did. I didn't understand the problem that was posed by lack of consistent internet access or devices or confidence in using online software. And eventually what we landed up with as a project management tool for that team was very different. It was a whiteboard in a corner of an office that had sticky notes that moved through a process. But it solved the same problem in that it made what people were working on transparent to the whole team, and it meant that you were less likely to have things fall through the cracks. So it really did help the team become more efficient. And I think that team seeing me grapple with that problem and not sort of just hand off a solution and move on really helped to build a foundation of trust with that team. That I was there in the office, became a sort of fixture for that team in the Ministry of Health, allowed me to really kind of grapple with problems and act as a problem-solving partner. And I think that really allowed us to move things forward. And I think it's really, so what works for us is showing up consistently, showing up with empathy, and showing up in good faith, sort of recognizing that you're all trying to work on the same set of problems.
Fantastic. So really echoing Ofoe's earlier point around where ownership sits and who drives that agenda. Now, Leila, you as a foundation have made a decision to shift from direct delivery to system support. So we have Ofoe who is looking at central systems, civil service reform, etc. And you are doing it from the sectoral perspective. We would love to hear from you what works well and what works less well from your experience.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Leila Hosni, I'm from Egypt, and I'm the executive director of the Sabiris Foundation, who's been established 23 years ago. And before I get into what works and what doesn't, actually, we as a foundation, we've been working for 22 years in just grant and giving people money with monitoring and evaluation. Last year, we actually launched our strategy that focuses on two main goals, which is fighting multidimensional poverty in Egypt and empowering agents of change. And when you look at the second objective, empowering agents of change, we have government and civil society as two main important partners to the foundation on how to drive change. Also, we follow the effective altruism, of course, philosophy, and a lot of what we do is evidence-based. I mean, 20% of our budget, which is very big, works on innovative projects by the NGOs, and 80% have to have evidence-based in order to be replicated. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we in Egypt, and I say it bluntly, we don't know what works. And there's a lot of money that's going into projects, same villages, over and over again, and it's not working. So we wanted to be a catalyst of change as the biggest, by the way, private philanthropic organization in Egypt to work on evidence-based, which is still very green in Egypt. So everyone last 3 years was saying, what is this? It takes time, it's a lot of money, everything is in dollar terms. What are you doing this? And then we actually got the buy-in of the government in 2021, and we actually initiated with the government the Egypt Impact Lab, which is actually positioned at the Ministry of Planning, Economic Empowerment and International Cooperation. It's a ministry that follows all this, and it's inside this ministry that we are co-founders of this. We're very happy for that because we can see that this is a core to all the other ministers that are, if they want to do projects, they have to go through the Egypt Impact Lab. I mean, this is system change. It's a big, it's been only working for 3 years. The funds are coming regionally, but also internationally. We are giving funds every year, and we're seeing that most of the private sector donors also are now want to be partnered with the foundation and other partners of the foundation. What makes it a bit difficult and challenging, I would say, is the time constraints and how expensive it is, but we still do believe that it works, and I'm going to speak in the next question about a program that we're scaling with the government. Actually, we are scaling, so it's possible to scale with the government if you have the right data, if you have the right, mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila. And I really like the point you make around data, monitoring and evaluation, evidence. We often hear that government doesn't make decisions on evidence. And I think this is a really clear example that that's a myth that needs to be parked. Governments might not make decisions on randomized control trial or wait for an RCT data set to make a decision. But real-time data is something that they appreciate from what I'm hearing from you. That's excellent. So I'd like to come back to you, Bissy. At the moment, there is a sense that governments are not always supportive of philanthropy. Now, we know that what we saw in Ekiti State is not quite true. Would you say that generally across Africa, there is an increasing appetite to strengthen the partnership between governments and philanthropies to move forward national agendas?
Well, you know that there is always a huge gap between intention and what really happens. I don't think there's any government who will say they don't need the support of the philanthropy community. But what tends to happen is there is not enough of an expression of political will to ensure that that is the case. And in this instance, political will can be expressed in a number of ways. If you are really serious about attracting, just the same way in which you want to attract investors into your plans, if you want to attract philanthropic support, you have to have the necessary mechanisms in place to be able to do that. The person responsible should not be a junior assistant somewhere, a special assistant. It has to be a high-ranking person with a certain level of expertise, clout, and gravitas, who can ensure that those conversations happen at a certain level. Then you also need to be able to commit a certain amount of your time as the political leadership. I've seen cases of donor partners visiting a state governor and they're there for 3-4 days and don't get to see him. And they're all hymns in Nigeria, by the way. We have 36 governors, they're all hymns. So I would have said him or her, but they're all hymns. Now, and eventually, when they do get to see someone, the governor will fob them off to a commissioner or a permanent secretary and so on. So an expression of political will is how much of your time how much of yourself you are making available. And in terms of matching resources, how much are you willing to put on the table? Because if people want to come and support the work you are doing, you have to be able to bring certain things yourself, depending on what the context is, whether it's office space, or vehicles, or personnel, and so on. And then another issue to do with the way we need to make sure that we're taken more seriously by philanthropic investors is ensuring that the narratives that they have about the same reasons they give for not wanting to support Africa generally. The poor, image, the corruption, the lack of systems, lack of transparency, and so on. You need to be able to make people comfortable about what you are doing, be clear about what your vision is. And even you were talking about data, the other time. There are quite a number of governments who have very ambitious long-term plans. They could be 10 years, 20 years, for the country or for the state. Ekiti State, for example, has a 30-year plan. But the reality is the governor of the state has to deal with his own political realities. He has 4 years. Actually, he has only 3 years because he's going to spend 1 year, politicking. So you need to be able to present information, data, plans, projects that can get certain things done within that time frame. But if there's no clear communication around that, then people will go away with the impression that you're not serious, you're not competent, you're not capable. And I think the last thing I would add is it's not easy for governments to build the capacity that they need to have conversations with non-conventional givers. And so if we are willing to support certain things that we hear of and that we like that's happening. So for example, I would love, we are not supposed to pitch, but I would love for people to take an interest in Ekiti State and what we've done with the issue of gender mainstreaming over the past 14 years or so. We've taken it very seriously. Right now in Ekiti State, the deputy governor is female, the head of service is female, the secretary to the state government is female, the deputy speaker is female. And this is coming, we've got to this point because we've been able to shift the culture of the state when it comes to the thinking and attitudes around women being in certain positions or women having power. So I think, everybody should, if you have an opportunity, have conversations with, you don't know who your friend, you don't know where your friend might end up. Let's build the required relationships because maybe this might become a minister in Ghana, at some point, or she might even become the president or vice president. I said maybe. So let's build relationships with our friends in these circles so that when there's an opportunity, we can then use that. It's low-hanging fruit. We can then use that to then start moving our agendas forward in transformative ways.
Thank you very much, Bisi. APF, Bisi was not pitching. She was just saying that it's very important that philanthropists understand the priorities of government and see the space for opportunity and using Ekiti as an example. So please don't let her get into trouble. So Leila, I'd like to come to you. I was really struck by a point Bisi made, which was around governments positioning themselves effectively to engage with philanthropists. So making sure that they are working at the right level, making sure that they are explaining the political economy within which they are operating. And my question to you is that sometimes we hear that philanthropic stakeholders that are working with government struggle because there is a misalignment between what they want to do and the government's priorities.
Yeah.
I don't think they should be there anyway, but that's another story.
I was just going to say that.
So, what has been your experience in terms of working to align what your organization does with the government's priorities, and how effective has that approach been for you?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that, I mean, if you're a philanthropic foundation like us and focusing on Egypt at the moment, because we want to expand, but for the moment focusing on Egypt, then you really need to see what the government wants to do. And that's why we launched our strategy a year ago, and we said we were going to focus on multidimensional poverty, which is a topic that is not really tackled with evidence and research in Egypt. So we went to the government, we said this is our strategy, we said we have a program that has been implemented by in Bangladesh by BRAC, which is the graduation model, you know, graduating the ultra poor. And we said we're going to take it. We want to localize it. We want the Ministry of Social Solidarity to be a partner, and they accepted to be a partner. It took 2 years to convince them for this, and then it took 3 years to localize the program with JPAL, which is Community Jamil in Egypt. It's local. It's based in the American University in Cairo, and then now we have the Egypt Impact Lab, very proudly also partnered at this, and then we worked for 3 years in the, let's say, the pilot program with 2 big community organizations in the 2 lowest, highest poverty rates in Egypt, Suhaga and Aswan. So it's in Upper Egypt. We picked this with the government. We worked with 8,000 families. And we just actually a month ago agreed with the Egyptian government that they will scale this project with us based on evidence, research, and science, because the project showed that even though it was implemented during COVID and 2 currency devaluations in Egypt, it showed that beneficiaries are, and I don't know if many people know about the program, but it's a program that tackles families as a whole. It has like a social dimension, it has financial literacy dimension, like the village saving associations in the villages. People take an asset transfer, so whether it's, you know, farming, exactly, etc. And then there is the conditional cash transfer. So the program as a whole, the results show that after 40 months of interventions, the families are still doing well and better, and their assets are going stronger. And when I say that it's like, I would say, 95% of the families. So it's actually a very, very strong evidence research. It's also on our website. Everyone can go and see it, okay? The problem with the government was it's very expensive. It is very expensive. So what we did before we go to scaling up, we did the half-cost solution. So we said, if we do the half-cost solution and we do this in other services and villages, how would it work like? And it's actually also, the results are showing even the same with the COVID, with the inflation. So, I mean, it takes time to work, you know, with government and systemic change, but at the same time, if you have the budget, I mean, as philanthropists, to go in with the government, with the mission-driven, because that's the power we have as philanthropy, the mission-driven, the problems we want to solve, the funding to actually direct it to research, it kind of works. Thank you.
Leila, I really like that example. So both you and government saw an opportunity, but government felt that it would be too expensive. So you looked at models to implement and pilot it, and once you had the evidence, managed to convince government to take it to scale. And I also took away patience. Just because government says no the first time, don't walk away. Take time to get to the bottom of the problem. And building on that, I'd like to come back to you, Ofowe. So in your work, you have successfully managed to build trust within the government system in Nigeria. Now, I'm not saying this because it's Nigeria, and Nigeria is challenging, but you've managed to build trust. Getting into civil service reform in most countries is extremely difficult and political with a small p. We would love to hear from you how you build that trust, how you build a relationship to get to where you are today.
Yeah, it's not easy, but I would say that COVID helped. We've been having conversations with the government for a number of years about digitalization before lockdown hit. Now, once lockdown came into force, everyone sat up and realized, ooh, this digitalization thing is actually important because we need to be able to work remotely. So that is how we got our foot in the door. They didn't have funding the Office of the Head of the Civil Service didn't have funding to actually digitalize. So we provided the funding. We provided the training and capacity building. We provided project support, technical support. We sent civil servants to go to different organizations to learn from their processes. We helped them to build their standard operating procedures. Basically, we took them step by step through the process. And that way, we earned their trust. Now, you were talking about data. We showed the impact that our intervention can have because we successfully digitalized the Office of the Head of the Civil Service. After that, everyone else started approaching us. They started, sending us messages. We're quite a lean team, so it was hard for us, but we grew. I would say my team started in COVID. There were 5 of us, there are now 30 of us. And we are now working on memorandum of understandings to digitalize and support the Ministry of Communications, the Ministry of Justice, the Accountant General Federation, all of these different entities. But more importantly, our work with the Office of the Head of the Civil Service has signaled that we are a partner that can be trusted. We are a local organization who understands the context of Nigeria, who doesn't come in thinking that we know all the answers, but we listen. We cooperate. They see us as part of them almost. And so that's how we were able to build trust. We also do very, very strategic stakeholder engagement. So we know all of the permanent secretaries. We engage with all of the permanent secretaries. And so when we transited from our previous head of service, who was actually instrumental in driving a lot of the work that we did, the new head of service is somebody that we had worked with in the past, somebody that we had supported in the past. So she knows us. And we are sitting in all of the war rooms that she has developed to help to drive reforms. So I think that if you are reliable and that you show that you are willing to engage and understand, their problems, their priorities, their context, and support them to be better, not come in trying to solve all their problems like some kind of white knight, they will take you as a partner. And I think that's how we've been able to build trust.
Thank you very much, Ofowe. So for anybody who still has doubts about working with governments, I took away 2 very important points from Ofowe. The first one is, don't let a crisis go to waste. That is really important. And the second one is, invest in understanding the political economy within which you are operating. And I think those are 2 very powerful messages. Now, Dylan, you're not a white savior, are you? No, okay, good. So I'm going to ask you my next question, which is, governments and philanthropists often have these interesting views of each other. So when I talk to philanthropists, and I'm taking the liberty of working in a policy institute that is always with philanthropists and saying, you really must fund policy reform, you must fund systems reform, you must fund this. And they always say to me, nah, governments are too short-term, Mr. Mavis. Economic transformation takes too long, and governments are only thinking in 4-year cycles. And 2, we need data to convince our principles, and governments don't do data, although I think we've debunked this on the panel right now. And governments are too bureaucratic. It's too hard to navigate the bureaucracy. And then when I talk to governments, they say, we love philanthropic money, but we really wish they had a better understanding of the complexities we have to navigate. Because as a government, we are navigating politics, political economy, and national development. So as an individual who's sat in the middle of it, what would you say to governments and philanthropists in this room about those perceptions of each other?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of misperceptions, I think, and I mean, it's interesting. I've heard this point that governments plan along election cycles a few times over the last few days. It hasn't really been my experience of working with government that they're the short-term thinkers. To some extent, that's been my experience of working with philanthropists and donors, right? Is that you work, we often hear, well, we're finalizing our strategy, or we've changed our strategic priorities, we have a new program officer, we have a new CEO, you're no longer a fit, right? I think government has been fairly consistent with the problems that they're trying to address. And so, yeah, I find governments take a longer term view than you might think, and that might be to do with where we target our support. We tend to try to work below the level of political appointee within the civil service, so career civil servants who work in government, rather than a governor or a minister or president, because yeah, they are much more at risk of moving on or being removed at some stage. But I think it's hard to build trust, as the first pointed out. That's how progress happens, right? Progress happens at the speed of trust, and it's really hard to build that when there are these misconceptions. And I think one of the reasons that there are such misconceptions is these conversations are happening in separate rooms very often, right? People aren't getting around the same table. We've done some work recently in Ghana, actually, on helping the Ghana Health Service to establish a innovation platform, right? To identify promising health technologies that they want to institutionalize and scale up nationally. And that has some bilateral, some donor funding, some philanthropy involved there, but it's government-led, right? And we started that process with a co-creation workshop where we brought funders and innovators and other partners and stakeholders together, and really started to try and articulate what are some of the problems that government's trying to address, where is innovation really needed. I think some of the things that government was trying to solve for was really surprising to the innovators in the room, right? And so often those innovators are coming to government at such a late stage in the process, right? You arrive with a glossy report on a pilot project that you've poured resources into in one corner of the country, and you hand it over to the Ministry of Health and say, you're welcome, please will you scale this up? And government doesn't necessarily have the resources or the skills to be able to do that. And it's not necessarily their priority at the time to work on the same problem set. And so, I mean, unless you've involved government much earlier in the process, that glossy report may as well be an obituary for your idea, right? And I think making sure that you're there early enough and a little more collaboration with government as a partner from early on in the process is really important. It takes patience, but if scale is the goal rather than a short-term project cycle, then that's worth investing in, I think.
Thank you very much. So, this is my takeaway from the panel so far. We all agree that working with governments is important if we're going to reach scale and achieve sustainability. But to do that, we need to invest in a few things. We need to ensure there's ownership of whatever processes that we are engaged in. We need to be patient and play the long game. Evidence does work with government. So when you are working with government, ensure that you are bringing evidence of impact to the table. But make sure that your evidence of impact is phased around cycles and is relevant at a particular time. Don't let a crisis go to waste. We are about to let about 3 or 4 crises on the continent go to waste. This is the time for us to all roll up our sleeves and engage. partnership should be at the heart of what we do. And Dylan's last point around, make sure the government is in the room when you are planning whatever you are planning to do with them. So those are the takeaways from the panel. I'm not going to go back to the panel yet. I'm going to come to the audience in the room. If we haven't convinced you, put up your hand. Excellent. I love this. If we've convinced you, but you want more information or you want to share, please do. But I'm not going to be a polite moderator. If you speak for more than 2 minutes, I will. So we have, I'm going to start, I'm biased. I'm going with the ladies first. So one lady here, one lady there, a gentleman here, and a gentleman there. So you go first, please.
More of a comment than a question. I think this panel has brought home the analogy of the marathon, the long game. Yes, children and women are dying today. We need to get education, the children out of school, in school tomorrow, today. We need to tackle the challenge that we've been given on creatives arts today, but for it to stick, we have to work with government and play the long game. So it's really just, it warmed my heart, even to hear that somebody is bold enough to take on a big, hairy goal called civil service reform. But that is what is going to transform and make the change stick. So it's thank you for running the marathon.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, my name is Gabelo. I'm from One-to-One Children's Fund in South Africa and UK. Very interesting conversation. A piece, a gap that I've not heard mentioned at all today. I do agree about everything that the panel has said, you know, the right players in the room, but I would also say, please consider what are the existing indigenous leadership systems in the communities that you are serving? Because you have to include those leadership structures, not just government. If you're going to be talking about sustainability, if you are going to be talking about resilience, if you're going to be talking about adoption, because governments inevitably run on a term cycle, even if they plan long term, but the individuals run on a term. But traditional leadership does not. And so if you bring them into the room, into those conversations, and make them co-stakeholders, one of the things we found to be really powerful is that they are even able to further hold government accountable where government fails. Because sometimes, from a philanthropist's point of view, you've given your money, the system is in place, everything is there, you are gone. Who's there every day? And oftentimes, it's the traditional leaders who then hold government accountable to what they promised, because they have their people's interest at heart and have no term in mind. So please, let's start more and more thinking about how do we start bringing into the conversation the leadership structures in the communities that we are serving. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Daniel, Elevate Africa. Just to start from where I finished last time, there was a triangle I talked about. So the work that I has done, Fogwe has been fantastic, because I mean I had a front seat view seeing what they had done when I was an aide to my president, and they sat down at that sweet spot between the political, the technical, and the bureaucratic, and they provided enough incentive for people to have buy-in and then to get that traction with the programs that they put in place. And so this is a success story. Talk about stories that we should tell. A success story that we need to capture and talk about. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's been a lot of emphasis from their point and the work that they've done on institutional ownership, institutional memory, and institutional capacity. In order to drive things sustainably, it's important that that collateral being developed is being handed over and warehoused somewhere, and it's been managed. The last thing, which is a question, is sometimes in philanthropy, where the money is put causes problems, or should I say reverse or negative incentives within the government system. So you find donors giving monies to conflicting or competing initiatives. So how do we align with all the donor monies in circulation, ensure that there's reinforcement or reinforcement or strengthening of the donor activity or the donor funding, and how that aligns with national budget and also private sector activity? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Taye from Hafer again. I think it was good to hear out our sister in the panel. Government engagement is very critical. It is the future. So for Hafer, government and local actors' engagement are very critical. Not just in the design, not just implementation, they are the future. For sustainability, they are there. So they trust is very critical, credibility is very critical. They trust you when they see value in your approach, in your strategy. If you have locally led development approach, and when they see you are not developing dependency, rather you continue efforts in the future, they trust you. We may be one of the few NGOs in Africa are receiving funds from governments. We recently signed 3 contracts in Rwanda for multi-million-dollar programs. So that trust is very, very important. We could not only co-design, they call on us to support them, not just on projects, but on their own projects, to show that small things that may matter for the citizen in terms of approach. We don't leave anything that really short-term or something that creates dependency, rather associate with them with their long-term. They invite us when they do their long-term strategic plans. So we understand their long-term road and visions. So we are part of their roadmaps, and we are also part of their vision, which will align together. Although we are an international organization, the way we do is look like local actors.
I'll start coughing now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we have one
Yes.
back there, and I'm going to give you 1 minute.
Another
I'm looking
here.
at the time. Where?
Here.
Here?
To your right.
Okay. So then it's now 30 seconds each. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Sarah. I work for TICO. My challenge to the panel is that, it is great when we talk about long-term sustainability through government. But, I often think about if I have good examples of that sustainability. Because often we see that when we talk about transition, it ends up that a few years later, we go back to the drawing board. At what point do we actually, as part of the philanthropy that we are plugging into government, hold government to account as the duty bearer? At what point do they actually start financing and commit to sustain the gains that have been made by philanthropy? And I'm speaking about the issues around health in particular. When we talk about system strengthening, I think we need to step it up a little bit to go away from manifestos of government in power and look at how we strengthen the bureaucracy within government, which often stays for a longer time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Over there. Last question, I'm afraid. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon. Abigail Kajumba from Emerging Public Leaders. We often describe the civil service as the secret sauce, and I've really appreciated this panel, appreciating the importance of government and of civil service. So my comment and question is around the people who make up the civil service and the often underrepresented groups, particularly in higher positions of leadership, such as women, youth, and other underrepresented groups like people living with disability. And so my question to all of us and thought is around how we ensure that there's a continual pipeline of such individuals and people so that, as to misquote someone earlier on another panel, so both for equity, but also for efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like that short question. So I'd like to come back to each of the panelists. We have what I would say are 4 questions. One on around indigenous leadership systems, and given that in Africa, most of the time we have a dual governance system in the country. It would be great to hear your views on how we engage with those indigenous governance systems as part of the sustainability agenda. The second was around donor coordination. The third was around accountability right at the beginning. And I think, Leila, you had a good example of how you had a condition for scale as part of your agreement for Egypt. And then the final one is around building the pipeline for the secret source. I really like that. I'm an ex-civil servant. I love the fact that I was a secret source once upon a time. So thank you. So I'd love to hear from each of the panelists, but when you pick the question you want to answer, and you all pick one each, pick the question you want to answer, and when you've finished answering the question, I'd like you to leave one piece of advice for any philanthropist in this room who would like to support governance systems, reform, and scale. So Leila, I'd like to begin with you, please.
Thank you. So I'll take that question of how to partner with the government and what are the conditions to partner with the government, because, I mean, it took us 6 years to actually scale at a national project, a national scale a project. And I think if you have the right mechanisms, if you had the right data, if you agree on a certain budget, the government will be happy to partner with you. But what we did, and I like a comment that was raised, is that we work a lot with community-based organizations. So the government does not implement by itself. It governs these projects. It assesses the KPIs that are put, and it sees the research. But the community-based organizations, we started in Bab Amal, which is Door of Hope, which is our program with 2 community-based organizations that were trained, and now they are training each 7 other community-based organizations that are working. You know, they are traditional leaders. They are people from the villages. They are trusted, so trust is there. It's very important. And they actually shaped, with BRAC, when they came here, the model. So that's why I think it worked, or it's gonna work also when we go to scale, because now we're moving to 200,000 families. So, I mean, it's a very big number with the government, but I mean, we have local, you know, expertise on this. And my takeaway or my advice is respect and trust the local expertise. It's very, very important. We took a model from BRAC, we localized it very much, we changed a lot of things with them. We had the community with us, we had the government with us, we had other private sectors with us, so everyone was on the table, and that's why I think trust the local expertise.
Thank you very much. Dylan.
Yeah, I think the pipeline question on people becoming tomorrow's civil servants is a really interesting one, and how you make sure you're not sort of reinforcing existing inequalities with the sort of pipeline that you're building out. I think EPL does a terrific job at identifying promising individuals and training them up. I mean, our focus is much more on the sort of in-service development of civil servants that are already working. There's a huge role to be played for this type of work as well. I think we're increasingly focusing on how do we institutionalize some of the capacity building that we're doing locally, right? So how do we identify the local universities or training partners or working with government institutions? Ghana Health Services just launched this, the Health Service Institute to really take responsibility themselves for developing future leaders. But I think it's an absolutely excellent point that looking at the pre-service training of those civil servants, you need to consider ways in which that you're not just reinforcing existing dysfunction, right, with new people coming in. Yeah, and my takeaway, I'll just sort of repeat from, I think we've heard consistently on this panel is the importance of trust and seeing that as an investment for philanthropists. If you really want to see success in the long term, that's investing in building those relationships with the public sector and really with a broader range of partners is critical.
Thank you, Bissy. Now, I realize that we're standing between people in their lunch, so we need to... Thank you. Bissy, over to you.
I know I don't have time, but I want to answer 2 questions, but I'll do it as quickly as possible. On the issue of supporting local indigenous systems of knowledge and authority, that's extremely important. I don't know of any work that we can do at the different levels. We are working national, subnational, and other levels where we can get away with any programming with not involving traditional rulers, religious leaders, community leaders. That's absolutely critical. And on the issue of continuity in governance, that for me is a really big challenge. And I'm an eternal optimist. That optimism was challenged severely at a time when, after my husband's first term in 2014, he did not win re-election right away. So we left for 4 years and he went on to become a minister and did other things. And then he was re-elected in 2018. During those 4 years, a lot of the work that had been done from 2010 to 2014 had virtually disappeared. And it is the same civil servants who we had promoted, who we had trained at home and abroad, who we had given all the tools that Ufowe has to help build their capacity, who acted as if those things did not matter or they did not exist. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of political fear or what political patronage does to systems that are supposed to be there to ensure one process follows another. So in order to address that, one of the things that we did was, particularly in relation to the work that I was doing, we realized that we really didn't have that many gender specialists in the state. And so the woman who was the head of service then suggested that we organize an academic program with the state university and pay for people to go and acquire higher education, a master's in social work or a master's in gender, and then we would mobilize the resources and pay for it. And that way, and we also included men, women, and civil society participants as well. That way, we were able to get 18 people to go through the master's program within 18 months. And they're about to start another step now. So that, for me, was extremely important. In terms of what I would like to suggest going forward, it's important to involve civil society organizations in whatever work we are designing or planning with governments. Because in the years that we were not there to carry forward a lot of the work that had started, it was the civil society organizations mounting surveillance, asking questions, demanding for accountability. And so I think that's extremely important.
Thank you very much. Ofowe.
I'd like to speak to the continuity point, and that's something that we took very seriously when we started all of this process of reforms and digitalization and so forth, because it is typical for one administration to overturn the work of the others. Because we are working with the civil service, there is an existing structure. There's civil service rules. There's things that are actually written into law that cannot be easily turned over. So we were very, very intentional about making sure that any reforms that we supported and implemented was actually written into the civil service rules. So it's not going to be easy to overturn. Piece of advice that I would give, I think someone mentioned about it being a marathon. It is a marathon, especially when you're trying to achieve systemic change. You have to go into it with your eyes open, knowing that results may take time to achieve, but you can sort of structure your program so you have quick wins that your team can lean into, and also the public servants themselves. Systemic change takes time. Do not expect miracles, especially when you're working with civil servants.
Thank you very much, Ofowe. So, as a head of an organization who spends all her time talking to ministers, civil servants, civil society, etc., I hope that the philanthropists in this room today have seen the value of engaging with national government systems for long-term scale-up and long-term sustainability. And they've also seen the value of playing the long game. So if today we are talking about government systems, given all the complexities, we can't do that thing we like doing a lot, which is stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. If we want continuity in government, we also need to break the cycle of stop, start in the philanthropic world and ensure we continue some of the difficult things we started.